Welcome to Outside Sales Talk, where we meet with industry experts to learn the strategies and tactics that make them successful. I'm your host, Steve Benson, and I've helped thousands of salespeople all over the world crush their quota. Today, I'll help you crush yours. Welcome back to Outside Sales Talk. Today we have Liam Martin with us, and we're going to talk about breaking boundaries with remote work and outside sales. Welcome to the show, Liam.
Thanks for having me. I am prepared to break down some boundaries. Let's get our sledgehammers out and make it happen.
Let's do it. So Liam Martin is co-founder of Time Doctor, a tool that provides time use analytics for companies. He's also the co-founder of Staff.com, a company that concentrates on providing companies with long-term outsourced labor relationships. And he's also the co-organizer of Running Remote, the world's largest remote work conference. So you're really the guy to be talking about for this stuff, huh?
This is my passion. I have been working remotely for the past 15 years. Back in the day, it used to be called telework. Now it's called remote work. Somewhere in there, we also talked about it being called outsourcing or distributed work, but basically at this point, it is any individual that works from home or works from a co-working spaces. They're basically disconnected from a centralized office. That's what we define as remote work. I've been doing that for 15 years. And I think it is not only, and I know that you're in an office right now, but I think this is not just a nice to have, but it will be the most dominant source of work within the decade.
Yeah, and we certainly use it at Badger, both internationally and domestically. Remote work is certainly a trend that I feel like most technology companies have moved in the direction of. I mean, it's over the recent years, it's become such a big part of how companies do business in general. What do you think? The future of remote work is?
So right now, 2018's numbers were 6.5%. So in the United States, so 6.5% of the US workforce works majority remote. And there are two studies that predict that it will be 50% penetration by 2027, and another one has 50% penetration by 2025. So let's just call it even and call it 2026. So by 2026, the majority of the US workforce will be working remotely. And this is going to be a massive shift in the way that we understand work. Field sales, as an example, is a perfect example of, in essence, remote work. I mean, I don't really know why a field sales agent would necessarily need to check in with a head office if they're doing field sales, as an example.
Frequently
they're doing remote work.
Yeah, I think it's one of the earliest forms of remote work and it was out of necessity. I mean, field sales teams have needed to cover geographic territories, and so there would be the centralized office, and wherever it is, New York or LA or whatever place it was in, and then the field sales team was spread geographically across the country. And so that's one of the first large teams, I would say, that tends to be remote historically. I can't think of any others, but.
Well, and customer support, front office stuff, that kind of thing is all going remote. And it's not just happening in the United States. I think we're seeing a global movement where employers and employees will be able to find the best of each other. And it's just the furthering on of globalization. Back in the 90s, we used to use that terminology of globalization. Well, this is the result of that. And we've laid the infrastructure, which are tools like Slack and Zoom and Time Doctor and all of these other kind of SaaS products, to be able to measure and deploy remote work at scale. And now that all of these things that have been laid out, I'm very confident that within the next 2 to 3 years, when the next economic correction occurs, we are going to probably see the majority of Fortune 500 recognize that instead of doing direct layoffs, they can instead deploy remote work agreements, because the average remote worker is about 40% more cost effective than an on-premise employee. So instead of firing everybody, we can actually just all go remote, get the same level of productivity or better productivity out of those individuals, but then still have a huge cost savings. So I actually think within the next 10 years, people will be asking to come back to an office, because Fortune 500 will recognize how profitable it is to actually run remote work agreements. Right now, they're a little scared. They're poking at the idea. That very soon is going to change.
Yeah, I mean, one of my experiences with it was when I worked at IBM, and we had probably, I don't know, 10 floors in this building in San Francisco, big building downtown, and maybe more. I'm not even sure how many it was originally, but then they collapsed. They took away everyone's desk, so everyone became deskless. But there were only a certain number of all the desks. You could go use any desk basically. They were all just empty, but you wouldn't like leave a picture of your husband or whatever on the desk. You would just show up at any desk and sit down at any empty desk and then start working there. And you just have your little work bag and your laptop inside of it. And they collapsed those 12 floors or whatever it was down to 6, then down to 4. And they just told anyone, hey, if you need to work in the office, come to the office. If you want to work from home, work from home. So it went from 12 floors to 6 floors to 4 floors. I think by the time I left, it was probably about 2 floors that they still had because just nobody was in the office. And I actually always went to the office because I live pretty close to downtown in San Francisco anyway. So it was easy for me. And I was super early in my career, so I like to get the mentorship from other salespeople and learn from them. But in general, everyone's like, if I can stay home, I'm staying home, man. I'm not going to take the train in.
Absolutely. I mean, you're describing internally sourced co-working, which is a lot of what large corporate is currently doing.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding the WeWork disaster that has currently happened. I think this is December of 2019. Last month, we saw WeWork completely implode. And that was really they declared themselves as almost like the Amazon AWS of office space, right?
Yeah.
So why deploy direct infrastructure? Why deploy a server rack as an example when you can just borrow the cloud infrastructure from WeWork and deploy it that way?
Right.
I think that thesis is still correct. However, it should be run by a much more efficient organization than WeWork.
Yeah, well, and it's not that they had a bad idea in my opinion. It's just they had some bad contracts, and most important, their valuation was just radically off. I mean, they were. It's not a bad idea. It's just, well, if you say that your Honda Accord's worth $2.5 million and sell 25% of it at that rate, and you're gonna have a problem, right? Like it's gonna be a disaster.
Yeah.
So
those pieces, they're all in place to be able to make remote work really quote unquote work. And there's going to be an economic opportunity for companies right now. I think within the next 2 years, for us at least, we're seeing such a massive labor opportunity by being able to actually hire workers at scale and get talent that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to get access to. That, and for everyone else that runs remote first teams, they're seeing the same thing. Just the talent that's being presented is crazy, and the quality and the cost benefits are crazy. But I think that's probably going to lock up within the next 2 years. And I think for people that are thinking about looking at remote work now, right now it's an employee perk. It's actually the number one thing that can make your employees happier in most of all survey polling that's done in the HR space. But within the next few years, it's not just going to be an employee perk, it's going to be a requirement. People are going to have to be able to know how to hire remotely. Otherwise, they're going to be left behind.
Makes sense to me. How would you say that this new era that we're entering into, the era of remote work, how would you say that's changed the landscape of sales? What would your advice be to an outside salesperson, given what you know and given your expertise?
Sure. So we actually have a very interesting process for our sales team. We went through a few different iterations. We're now at the iteration where we have our VP of sales that pulls in sales reps and works with them directly for about a quarter. And if they don't hit quota by the end of that quarter, they go home without a job. If they do hit quota by the end of that quarter, then they go home with a job and they go back to their local territory that they work out of. Understanding collaboration, understanding how to communicate mentorship virtually is really important. So as an example, our sales team, they play video games 2 or 3 times a week together, and that's paid time. And it's just an opportunity to actually discuss things that maybe you wouldn't necessarily discuss in a direct office setting, but you would discuss next to a water cooler.
Mm-hmm.
And then also too, everyone in the sales team does review calls of other reps through Zoom recordings. So we record all of our calls and then we analyze it and we say, hey, this was a good point, this was a bad point, that kind of stuff. And that's how you can overcome the kind of synchronicity that sometimes you need in direct sales.
That makes sense. Would you say that outside sales and remote work always overlap, or how do they overlap? What's the connection there?
I mean, I think salespeople were actually one of the first people to go remote, to your point, and it's very easily accessible by a remote work community, by the remote work community. A lot of people are now going remote now that are salespeople. So, but I think a lot of people are actually getting left behind in that process as well. I know a lot of older people that have been in the game for 20 or 30 years that we've tried to hire that have actually had a lot more experience than younger people. They just can't hit their numbers because their onboarding towards understanding the demo doesn't really work in the same way, or their collaboration with customer success doesn't necessarily work in the same way. So because they need that face-to-face interaction, and that's just not the person that we hire anymore. We need someone that's going to be able to onboard virtually. So it's definitely there's huge opportunities. I actually think right now probably there's a little bit of the reshuffling of the deck, because I think there's 2 salespeople on our team right now that are over the age of 50, and we have 20-ish people on the team. So that's a pretty interesting ratio. And those are the senior level guys that we actually, a lot of the other people look towards for mentorship, but we're mostly at like the sub 30 level. And I think that's because a lot of those people were able to understand remote work better than some of the older people.
And what is the technology landscape for remote work look like for sales teams? Like what specific things in the tech stack are really useful for a sales team that's looking to go remote?
You mean other than Badger mapping?
No, I mean I guess, I mean, yeah, I don't know
trying
if
to give you a plug, man.
Yeah, I get, yeah. Well, okay. So yeah, there's one, but what else? What is the tech? Actually, it's funny. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. But what does the tech stack look like for you for remote work for field sales?
Sure. So, I mean, for us, I'm just going to talk about our own sales team. We've got, we use HubSpot. You can use Salesforce. You can use anything else, but we use HubSpot. Just in terms of details connected to the tech stack, everyone on our team gets the Bose Sound True Ultras, which is actually what I'm wearing right now. They're about $70. And the reason why we really like them is they have very comfortable ear tips, but more importantly, the microphone is it's got a condenser inside of it as well. So it provides for really good audio, but it's very lightweight. So everyone can kind of put it in their pocket and they're very mobile with it.
What is that called
we use
again?
1Password.
We should put that in.
Bose Sound True Ultras.
Okay.
$70. I have like a dozen of them floating around all around, everywhere that I'm at, because it's just so easy for me to kind of plug in and do what I need to do quickly and easily. And you can just bunch them up and put them in your pocket. For mobile people, that's big.
That's super useful. Yeah.
There's a lot of like subgroups of remote workers as well. One of the biggest ones is digital nomads, which are people that work from their laptops. So they have no set address and they just travel constantly. And for them, walking around with big cans is just not something that they're interested in doing. So being as efficient as humanly possible with their footprint is big.
Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely describes a lot of field salespeople who listen to this podcast. I mean,
they got you back at this point.
Yeah. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me? Hello? Liam, you there?
It looks like for some reason we dropped out a little bit, but hopefully,
It's
yes. Can you hear
okay.
me now?
We could hear you the whole time, so I guess you just couldn't hear us.
Oh,
So I'll just say the last thing I said again.
okay.
What was I just saying, Jenny? That a lot of field sales. Yeah, so that's definitely what a lot of field salespeople qualify as digital nomads. That's definitely
Right.
these guys are often driving around in their cars and visiting with customers and so they'll be working on their laptop out of the office, sometimes out of their home, out of the
Hmm.
Starbucks, whatever. Very very mobile group of people, out field sales teams. I think they've always had to be. What do you think are the
So,
biggest recent developments in technology for remote work?
well, I mean, I'll give you a couple ones that are just off the top of my head. One Password has just implemented a recent feature that I've been in love with, which is encrypting all of our passwords. So in our organization, because we're a remote first company, we don't want to actually distribute all of our passwords to different team members.
Hmm.
So what we do instead, anything that someone may get access to, they're not actually getting the direct password. They're getting the cipher connected to that password, and then 1Password is doing the login on their behalf. So let's say I need to let someone go in the future. I can just automatically go in and remove their 1Password access, which then basically pulls them from all of their logins
Hmm.
instantaneously. There's only one point of contention there, which is super useful. And I think it's
Yeah,
like $2 a month or something like that per user. So super useful.
yeah, that's
Google Apps for
pretty.
Business
Hmm.
is one of those ones that I use all the time. $7 per user per month, super easy. Slack is pretty obviously a big, huge kind of like messaging, communication, collaboration app that everyone uses. We still use Skype. We like Skype. It's actually something that we've grown up with over the last couple of years, but
Hmm.
Zoom is another really good option if you're going to pay for it. We use Trello for small projects. We use Stormboard for online collaboration, InVision as well for online collaboration. I have everyone in the team they all get a 32-inch screen. So going with their laptop, we issue MacBook Pros to everybody, but then on top of that, we get a 32-inch external screen, and it's all connectable through USB Type-C. So it's very simplistic, and the screen that we get, I think, is the ViewSonic. It's not that expensive. ViewSonic VX32, and
Okay.
you can connect through USB-C through it, and it also powers your laptop. So we have those not only for everyone's home offices, but then we also have crash pads. So we implement like almost kind of like internal co-working spaces in the company. If you have more than 5 employees in a location, you're able to open up a crash pad. And we just have kind of like, as you said before at IBM, 5 or 6 of those external screens with some, desks and stuff like that connected to it, and people can come there and collaborate.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, you described a lot of the stuff that we use. 1Password, Google, for email and docs collaboration, Slack. We use Dell monitors, I forget the one you mentioned, but ViewGen, I think.
ViewSonic
ViewSonic.
VX32s.
ViewSonic VX32s. Yeah, we'll check those out. And then we do the crash pad strategy as well at Badger. We have a couple apartments in Europe and a couple apartments around the U.S. and then I'm considering one in San Francisco right now, but that is hatefully expensive. so
Expensive.
so we haven't gotten that one yet, but those have been really useful
Another
for
honorable
that.
mention that I could make too that I've recently discovered is I'm on Mac,
Hmm.
and if you get an iPad Pro and you update the newest version of the Mac operating system, this acts as a second monitor,
Oh, no kidding.
which is really great if you're mobile. So if you want to be able to do like all of your Zoom calls on your iPad, and then you want
Hmm.
to be able to take notes on your MacBook, it's really great. And the stylus is just so useful in terms of that interactivity.
Yeah.
Um, I use
I
this
like the
all the
way
time
that
for like UI UX stuff.
I like the way the stylus charges itself on the side of the new MacBook Pro. The Pro, or not MacBook,
Yeah,
the
iPad Pros.
iPad Pro. I like the way it sticks on there and charges itself. That's really nice compared to the old ones you had to plug in, and then you always, it's so easy to run out of batteries in the thing.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
cool. So, talk to me about the advantages that remote field sales teams have over non-remote teams.
I mean, so number one, cost efficiency, right? Like you're not having an office, and that's kind of talking to like the owner
Mm-hmm.
of field sales organizations, or the sales manager. Your costs have gone down by on average 40%. And breaking down that number, that kind of connects to your saving costs, but then you're also just making that process a lot more efficient. If you have to have someone that gets in their car and then comes to head office even, and then starts doing their route, man,
Mm-hmm.
that's actually a really inefficient way to deploy your talent. You should instead just have them directly drive to where they're going to work.
Sure.
So that's one big advantage for the employer. On the employee side, it has been proven time and time again that remote work is the single most positive thing that you can do for employee happiness. So if you're running like an employee NPS score and you deploy remote work, it is the biggest singular bump that you can do. I think it boosts NPS more than a 10% salary hike
Mm.
for employees. Like
What
they
do you
want to do it that much more than getting a salary hike. So
that's
I think
awesome.
there's huge advantages on both sides.
What do you think about the hybrid model where people spend, you know, some number of days at home, some number of days in the office, and I see a lot of offices just closing up on Fridays or not coming in on Mondays, things like that.
So I think that remote Fridays are great. I think it's a really great way to kind of test the waters and see where you are, where you want to be in a year or two. But generally for me, when I see that hybrid model, it moves in the direction of full remote. And it mostly comes from the employer side, because they recognize, well, okay, everyone's like, I have a crash pad here, and there's 6 people in this local city that work for me, and I was the only one in the office today. And
Mm-hmm.
when you look at it and think to yourself, okay, well, this office costs me $4,000 a month.
Right.
Man, maybe I could get an entirely new rep for $4,000 a month that could be
Yeah.
working for me,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
So you kind of run those numbers and you think to yourself, well, maybe this is the wrong idea. So I think that it's a great introduction to remote work, but I do see it. I mean, most of the time, remote work kind of spreads like a virus. Like in San Francisco, as an example, for Generation Zer developers, so developers under the age of 26, 3 out of every 5 of them work remotely right now in San Francisco. Whereas for even someone that's like 10 years ahead, it's a complete reverse. It's like 1 out of every 5 developers works remotely in San Francisco. So
Interesting.
huge change.
That is really interesting. Um, what do you think a sales manager can do to build more trust with a remote sales team?
I think, I'm going to change what I would say is a standard argument towards trust, because I actually think you really need to pay attention to salespeople. You need to keep them on a much shorter leash than a developer, as an example. Generally, they're A-type personalities. They're very extroverted. They want to be able to talk with people, and salespeople generally are going to do whatever maximizes their own personal return for the minimum amount of input humanly possible. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say, actually, if someone wants to work remotely, they really need to prove it to their salesperson or to their sales manager. So what that would mean is like making sure that you're hitting your numbers, making sure that your numbers are not changing. We actually had one of our recent sales guys, an AE of ours, moved to Medellin in Colombia, and he was in the US, and he just realized that Medellin was really cool and he could cut his costs to like 25% of what they were in the US. So he moved to Medellin, but his numbers went down by 20%.
I wonder why.
Right. Well, and he was having a ton of fun. No. So, I mean, he's having a ton of fun in Medellin, but then we had to actually grab him and say, hey, so I'm really excited that you're in Medellin, but you've went from number 1 in the team to number 4. What's going on? You know, like, you've got to be able to make sure that dollars and cents work for what you're doing. So, I mean, in terms of just deployment, right? Like, making sure your CRM is up to date, making sure you're on for meetings, that you've committed to actually do that virtual Zoom meeting and that you're there and you're present. We use Time Doctor internally inside of our organization for time tracking. You can do that as well. It's really up to where you're at in terms of developing that trust and communicating that information back to your employer to be able to say, hey, I know that this is a benefit and I'm making sure that I'm accountable to you because of that benefit.
What would you say are the major drawbacks and challenges of managing a remote sales team? Remote workers in general, really, but specifically sales, if you can think of any specifics.
Sure. So, I mean, that's also one that's pretty interesting. So there's lots of studies that come out about remote work, right? And the thing that everyone says continuous is there's a loneliness factor. That's probably the number one biggest problem for long-term success in remote work. We've done a little bit of psychographic testing for remote workers, and we recognized that people that are introverted are actually a lot more successful in remote work agreements than people that are extroverted, which is problematic for salespeople because if you're an introverted salesperson, you're probably not very good at your job.
Well, and
you're probably not going to be that successful.
I always found that. I always found myself to be relatively lonely when I was on a long sales trip, because you're not really getting the human interaction you want out of like a sales meeting. You're you're presenting, you're working, but I definitely found myself lonely in a lot of hotel rooms in like Kansas and like being like, oh boy, what am I going to do?
Right.
So
that's a major part of it. You need to be able to make sure you're communicating with your team on a regular basis, creating some type of virtual space, right? We actually tried for our support team, we gave them all Oculus Rifts because we started to see whether or not we could actually meet in VR. And it was a massive disaster. Just kind of as an aside, so everyone was able to build their own character and they meet in this virtual space. And, we had one guy that had like a 3-foot mohawk and like 4 boobs on his chest. And he was in neon, thongs and all this kind of stuff. And we just recognized that it was an HR nightmare.
Yeah.
That we just needed to shut down very quickly. But that's an example of, we're just trying to figure out different ways to be able to help people collaborate and get access to that communication that people are looking for. Loneliness is definitely a big problem. The second biggest one is collaboration. So I believe 86% of remote workers have stated that they feel their ability to collaborate is less effective when working remotely in comparison to when they're in an office. And the way that you overcome that too is just communication, right? So being able to very clearly create KPIs. And the beauty of sales is the KPIs are so clear. How much money do you make? That's actually one of the big advantages of deploying remote for salespeople because it's just so clear. But if you're talking about development and all these other types of things, it's a lot more existential. So identifying those KPIs and making sure that everyone's accountable to them, like we're doing, making sure that everyone's reviewing another sales demo per week, coming from another salesperson, and just sort of seeing how they're doing things differently and maybe talking about it. We play video games. They play a whole bunch of ones, a lot of Counter-Strike, a lot of first-person shooters, those types of things that they like, strategic video games, those types of things. kind of solve the collaboration and the loneliness problem, or at least they hopefully move the needle on them. This is all relatively new too, right? Remote work is something that at scale, 5 years ago, it was less than 1% of the US population. Now it's 6.5%. So we're implementing a very interesting experiment in how we work. So I don't have all the answers, but those are some of the leading indicators that the studies have found.
What would you say are some of the most surprising benefits of remote work to you?
Contentment, the ability to be able to work where I want to work and do what I want to do when I want to do it. I travel about 6 months out of the year, and I've been to 17 different countries in the last year. I've probably traveled more in the last year than most people do in their entire lifetimes. And that gift to me has only been afforded because I was able to work remotely. If I was working in a cubicle, there's no way I would have been able to do that. But we've engineered our company and our work philosophy to be able to do that. And that's been such a massive gift and so beneficial to me just as a human being.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I'm kind of a remote worker myself, really, just because we have, Badger has offices all over the world, right? And not to mention employees in different places. And so I spend a lot of time working out of those offices. So, I mean, I'm probably in my home office only 6 months out of the year. So it's,
right.
It's just, do I count as a mobile worker? I'm not sure. I mean, it's a hybrid, obviously. And when I am in, Spain, I'm at our Spain office, or if I'm in Utah, I'm in my Utah office. But
I think based off of my T-shirt, I can dub you officially a remote worker if you feel that you need someone to tell you. If you're traveling more than 6 months out of the year, you are a remote worker. And I would probably also put you down as kind of like a half-time digital nomad as well, which is another cool part of working remotely.
Yeah, it's true. It's definitely true. Well, I think a lot of salespeople are too. I mean, a lot of the travel is for going to my own offices and working with people that work for the company, but in different places. But a lot of it is going to meet with customers from a customer success perspective, a sales perspective. So, the next section is called Sales in 60 Seconds. So what we're going to do is quick questions, quick answers. What is the top quality that you look for in a remote sales worker?
If someone has not done a really boring job in like a McDonald's or a Burger King, they have not done door-to-door sales, or they have not done any type of military service, I don't hire them. I've found that if they haven't done some of those things that are hard, when things get tough, they just can't actually, they collapse under pressure.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of a rule for not just remote sales workers, or remote workers in general, but just anyone. If someone doesn't have something that looks like it hurts on their resume, I tend to shy away. What's the best advice you have for managing remote sales teams? If you were a manager, what should you be thinking about?
Document all of your processes. Absolutely, the number one reason why remote companies fail is because they don't have clear processes in place, and the implementation of that, it will take a long time. It's like doing your taxes. No one wants to do it, but it is probably the single way to scale a small organization to a large scale organization, regardless of whether they're remote or not. The only difference is with remote teams, it's something that you need to do much earlier on in the company's growth stage. Whereas you can get away with that a lot longer if everyone is in the same office, because that sacred knowledge doesn't necessarily need to be distributed and deployed digitally in the same way.
So yeah, I learned that even just having my when I opened my second office, that was and there were salespeople in two different offices. I like the knowledge didn't transfer around the same way as it was able to when everyone was in the same place, and so we really needed to document everything.
if you go to or if you just Google GitLab handbook, GitLab has the largest remote work process document I think I've ever seen. It's 3,200 pages. It's completely open source, and it will show you how GitLab does a demo, what kind of stock options you get when you join GitLab, how they sign their emails. Everything is in there. And the beauty of it is Dimitri, who's the CTO and co-founder of GitLab, encourages people to steal it. So steal it, create your own Git repository, and literally just change around the names, replace GitLab with Badger mapping as an example, and you're off to the races.
And everyone can just read 3,200 pages.
Yep, exactly.
Sounds fun. What's the greatest lesson that you've learned about remote salespeople?
Boy, remote salespeople need collaboration, and they need interaction more than any other department that I have been managing. And that was something that I didn't understand at the beginning of building a sales team. And now it is, if I had learned that lesson 6-7 years ago, I would have been a couple $1 million richer.
There you go. How do you measure the success of a remote sales team?
So we have an interesting metric at Time Doctor. We measure sales per hour. So we do not actually measure, we used to measure who made us the most money this month, and then we give out commission, basically a bonus based off of that particular month. We give out commission, but then we give a bonus structure for, let's say, whoever closed the most deals for that particular month. And we realized that that was moving us in a direction that we didn't necessarily want to go. So we had one salesperson that closed 5,000 MRR and worked for 250 hours during the month. And then we had someone that worked 150 hours during the month and they made 4,800 in MRR. Now, someone worked almost double the amount of time and made an extra $200 in MRR. We didn't want to start rewarding people that were just burning the midnight oil and at the end of the day, burning themselves out. We instead wanted to say, what's a more sustainable growth curve that we can make in our people? How can we make sure that they're staying mentally sane, as well as also making us bucket loads of money? So we now measure money per hour.
Interesting. I've never heard of anyone doing that. That is fascinating. Do you worry that some people will just that's like game that system, like meaning could they just work 30 hours a week or say they were working 30 hours a week but then cram all the sales in?
Yeah, so we actually have been measuring this specifically with Time Doctor because we're able to measure a whole bunch of data. We can measure how much. So we've actually been doing spot checking on people, and we don't do it that often. Maybe like one rep every 3 months, we'll spot check and we'll just say, did you really spend 150 hours working this month? Or did you spend a little bit more time? Let's look into this in a deeper way. Oh, you were having these sales meetings at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, it's not saying you were tracking any time at 3 o'clock in the morning. What's going on? So people need to be disciplined towards the tool. We use it internally. We eat our own dog food. But it is something that we're concerned about. But it was also just more of a statement for us to be able to tell our employees, stop working so hard, start working smart, not just hard.
Interesting. I feel like such an old man just paying sales reps based on their revenue they bring in.
Try that one. We'll see how. I mean, it's an interesting experiment. Sales numbers have not gone down, but I think that a lot of people's stress has.
Well, that would be a huge success then, right? That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. What is the main way you see remote work transforming the sales industry in the coming years? I don't know whether to say, I guess maybe let's say 3, 7, 10, 15, whatever metrics you want, whatever lines you want to draw in the sand.
Could you say that another way? What are I didn't catch that last
What are
part.
the main ways that remote work will change the sales industry over the next periods of time, over the years?
So I'll give you in the next 5 years, because I think that's a pretty nice round number.
Mm-hmm.
By 2025, about, I would say 75% of all sales, regardless of whether it's inbound, outbound, field sales, whatever, will be done remotely. And probably it's around 10 to 20% right now. So people are going to have to learn how to collaborate remotely on their sales meetings in a much more different way. The measurement is going to be a lot more quantitative, as opposed to right now where it's somewhat more qualitative. We're going to see probably a lot more digital nomads that are going to be salespeople. I think when I communicate with the digital nomad community, a lot of them do sales already because it's a really easy job to do while you're continuously traveling. So those are the major things that I see. I would probably say, I could be completely wrong.
And when you
Maybe this
just
completely
to define
collapses.
digital, I don't think a lot of people are familiar with the digital nomad concept. Do you mean someone
Sure.
who doesn't have a home but stays in hotels or short-term rentals around the world while they travel and work remotely via the internet? Is that your definition?
That's it. That's what a digital nomad is.
Okay.
Generally from
Just
places
making
that are
sure.
really nice and warm and cheap.
Right. Yeah. Think Medellin, the Philippines, southern Spain.
Bali,
Yeah.
yeah, Chiang Mai in Thailand, Ubud in Bali, Medellin in Colombia, Barcelona in Spain. These are all hot spots for digital nomads,
Mm-hmm.
and for remote workers as well. But for a lot of digital nomads, they'll just bop around to those different locations because they can.
Yeah. Live life on vacation. Just wake up and work for 8 hours. Very cool. As an actionable takeaway for everybody, what should sales managers listening today do as a first step towards getting started on using remote workers to strengthen their sales team?
First thing you should do is open up a Google Doc, identify all of the major processes inside of your sales organization, and start to document them. Spend 1 hour after you get off of this podcast just identifying maybe what you need to document. And inside of that, it's very important to identify what I call sacred knowledge. So what pieces of information does only one person in your organization have that is absolutely critical to your sales organization continuing to function and scale in the future? Identify where that sits, get them to put it on a piece of paper for you, preferably a digital piece of paper, and give it to you. If you can do that, you'll have the framework in place to be able to start doing remote work experiments. If you do not have that information in place, you will fail at remote work.
Yeah. Well, one tip I would give there is have people switch people's roles a little bit. So like if one person have kind of slowly move responsibilities around the organization, like take it away from this person, give it to this person, and have the person that was doing it document it for the next person. And by doing that, not only do you duplicate and replicate skills, it gets you in the habit of just delegating in general and hiring more junior people to take over the roles of take over the responsibilities and activities of more senior people. But you also get everything documented. So that's a strategy that I've employed over the years.
That's great.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to summarize all the wisdom that you've dropped upon us here about remote work.
Okay.
A lot of our people are listening to this in the car, so they can't take notes, etc. So in summary, there is a global movement of people working remotely. The average remote worker is about 40% more cost effective than an on-prem worker. Working remote is not just an employee perk. As time goes on, it will become a normal part of many people's jobs. And this is going to be very common in sales and already is. remote sales teams need to understand how to collaborate and communicate remotely. That's key to their success. Salespeople were one of the first groups of people to truly go remote, and that was by necessity, cover territories. Companies are looking for people who can be onboarded virtually, and that's a key skill when you're screening for to hire someone in this new remote virtual world that we're in here. Great remote tools include 1Password for dispersing and securing passwords, Slack, Google Apps for Business, Trello, Asana. Having good external screens and great headphones are critical. Advantages of remote field sales teams include cost efficiency, which we talked about, both in terms of office space savings and employee time savings, and being able to hire people that live in cheaper places rather than more expensive places. Employee happiness. It boosts net promoter score, and to be able to have your people work remotely. Remote sales reps need to prove to their sales managers that they can work well remote and continue to hit their numbers. A major drawback to working remote is loneliness and having trouble collaborating. Companies can host fun activities remotely to help with these drawbacks and get around some of them. Well, honestly, Liam, this has been a fantastic discussion of a really important topic. Where can our listeners read more about your work, reach out to you, get to know about what you do?
Number one, that was a fantastic review of this podcast. I'm just, I have been on 438 podcasts within the last year. And that is a super useful feature where if you're listening to this podcast, you don't have to listen to the whole thing. You can now just go back and listen to the last 5 minutes and get everything you need.
Secondarily, that is the goal. I mean, I feel like when you hear something twice, you remember it better, which is why I've kind of structured it this way. And just jot down a few notes as we talk, and then just plop it out at the end of the thing. Because and really, I mean, field salespeople are behind the wheel when they're listening to this. We've gotten that feedback time and time again, and so it's to hear it twice while you're driving is really useful. And I think a lot of people have told me they rewind that part and listen to it a couple times to let it really sink in.
Got it. So if you want to learn more about Time Doctor, go to timedoctor.com. If you want to learn about Running Remote, which is the largest conference on building and scaling remote teams, go to runningremote.com/Liam. This year, we moved it from Bali, Indonesia, where we had it last year, and we are moving this year to Austin, Texas. So it's just like Bali, except there's barbecue. And it's a lot closer for people that are located in the United States. So we're very excited about that. And if you want to get in contact with me, we had this discussion before I jumped on to the podcast, but I think the most honest form of social media is YouTube because it requires people's full attention and they at least can kind of see who I am and communicate with me on a face-to-face basis. So if you go to youtube.com/runningremote, any other form of social media that you see is not run by me. It may have my face on it, but it's actually someone that works for me that responds on my behalf, except for YouTube. So if you put a comment down there, I'll get back to you within a couple hours.
Very cool. Well, Liam, thanks for joining the show. This has been a great episode of the Outside Sales Talk. If any of our listeners can think of other sales reps that would benefit from learning all about what we've discussed here today with respect to remote work, share the love and forward this episode on to them. Take care until next time.